Just like any other living organisms, human, as a species, is living depending on the nature and also influencing the nature. But with the advanced technology, human has become the most influential species in the world. For a long period of time, we have been focusing on how to pillage as many resources as we can, but didn't attach importance to the consequences of doing so. Deforestation, water pollution, air pollution, habitat destruction. Various problems emerged as people paying more attention to the environmental protection. Actions like reforestation or water purification have been implemented. So how's our current situation in terms of the natural environment? What could be the most effective solution to those problems? To explore such a broad topic, let's use a special river as a template. A river has been tightly connected to human life since the pre-Columbia era and still plays an important role until now. The Hudson River.
I would say the environment here is better than in a lot of places. We have a beautiful place to live, but the beauty of this place is also under a lot of threat. So one of the things that comes most readily to mind is that our groundwater, the water that we use to drink, for example, is increasingly contaminated. So we have agricultural runoff from sewage and septic plants, and other kinds of inputs into our drinking water supply that are increasingly a problem. And I think we should also be really aware that our forests are in really rapidly declining health. It's easy to look around and see how beautiful and green the forests are, but climate change is causing a lot of stress to these trees, and there are also a lot of non-native pests that have come and killed off almost all or all of some species. So for example, these forests used to be filled with ash trees, and pretty much all of the ash trees are either dead or dying. And the same thing is true of a lot of other iconic trees of eastern forests. So even though there are still trees out there, the composition of those forests is changing really rapidly, and the effects of the stress from climate change with the damage done by these exotic pests is causing huge death of these forests. That would be hard enough, except that we're also continuing to cut down forests at very high rates, and so it's getting harder for forests to recover, in part because there's less forest to begin with, and because we're continuing to sort of erode forests, either by cutting them down wholesale or by increasingly making them patches of forest smaller and smaller. So I think that's something that a lot of people in the Hudson Valley don't really notice because they notice the natural beauty, but if you look at the forest's health up close, it's on a pretty steep decline. And we have a lot of species that are really struggling here as the area grows in the human impact. So I guess all of that, I would have to say our environment is not that great compared to what it has been here, but we're still much, much luckier than people in many parts of the world.
Since the river provided fast transport for goods, thousands of factories have been built near the river. As the industrialization came, sewage and chemical pollution became one major problem.
Things like PCBs get into the river. Sometimes those pollutants can cause direct effects on the organisms that come in contact with them or consume them. Often what happens is it's not the organisms that immediately consume them or come into contact with them, it's the pollutants accumulate up the food chain. So they first go into, for example, phytoplankton or zooplankton in the river, which then get eaten by fish, which get eaten by bigger fish, which perhaps get eaten by a bird. And it's the PCBs, for example, accumulate in the bodies of those organisms at higher and higher concentrations, whereas some of the other things that are eaten in the food chain leave the bodies. The PCBs stay in there. And so for a raptor like a bald eagle, for example, they can have a very high level of these pollutants. And that's where it's often at these very high levels that the pollutants become very dangerous to the organisms. So we might not see effects on some of the first organisms to come into contact, like the smallest creatures, but we see those effects in much larger creatures.
It's always expensive and complicated to restore the damage of the environment. Some of them may take decades of years to recover, and some of them could even be irreparable. It seems that the better thing we can do from now on is to minimize or prevent any further damage to the environment.
I think we need to change some policies at the state and federal and local levels that reduce the amount of pollution that we're releasing into the environment, that reduce the amount of carbon we're emitting into the atmosphere. So there are all kinds of sort of large-scale policies that we need to put into place across the country and around the world to reduce the threats. But we also need to find ways to take up less space for human needs and allow more space and natural functioning for wild creatures and wild spaces. So that means instead of continuing to cut down forests, we need to find ways to make do with the spaces we have and even to restore some of the areas we've degraded in the past. That's going to come down to some choices that we as individuals make about what we eat and how we live. Doesn't mean we have to give up things that we love. It just means that we have to think about valuing them and making them, maybe making our use of meat, for example, and other animal products more special and less everyday, because the consumption of animal products has a huge effect on the environment. And that's just one example. So we can still have a really high quality of life, but just not be so wasteful about it.
Dredging is the removal of sediments and debris from the bottom of the water bodies. It has been the main method of cleaning the river. Is it as effective as we thought? Should we continue doing so?
Dredging has been more effective than not dredging. There have been a lot of problems with the dredging operations that have been going on for some time now. So yes, it was a good idea to do it. There have been a lot of PCBs dumped into the river, and they were going to continue to cause environmental damage to the river for a very long time. So a lot of those PCBs have been removed, but not all of them. So the question is, do we keep going, and how clean is clean enough, and that kind of thing. Those are hard questions to answer, and it's come at a cost. I think one of the things we really need to be thinking about is, where do we put the material that we've dredged out of the river? That's been an increasingly potent concern, because it's often put into communities that have, the dredgings are often dumped in communities that have comparatively little power to prevent it. And we have to really think about those whole systems of remediation and who's bearing the cost of those throughout the whole process when we're planning operations like this.